John Gaeta.
What are your thoughts about this View conference here in Turin, Italy?
Very thankful that someone had the notion to put a conference like this in such a beautiful location.
When it comes to the visual effects industry, we're here in Italy, of course. Can you talk about the global nature of this industry today?
Okay, you're starting with an easy one. I thought softballs come first. I'm concerned by it. I'm of two minds. I mean, one is that the artistry and the science of visual effects never ceases to be unimpressive. It's always moving in directions that are, constantly reinventing itself. But the state of the industry, of the movie industry, is a disaster, in my opinion. And I have become myself a bit detached, simply because it doesn't, the atmosphere is not like it was in earlier years where innovation was rewarded, and that innovation is encouraged on some of the larger projects where visual effects is the center of the show. I'm not really interested in myself participating in producing a work environment where people have to work 60, 70, 80 hours a week. I think the value of their work is absolutely deserving of larger budgets and shares, since they are the reason why the audiences come to those movies. So I am not really in alignment with an industry that doesn't want to share in the rewards of films of that scale. And that's always been the case. I mean, that's always been a troubled part of the industry, since you asked.
Right. And the next question I was actually going to ask about the audience here, a lot of young high school, college kids that want to potentially enter this industry. What's it like for you to be able to speak directly to that audience?
Yeah, I mean, probably one of the greatest rewards of a career working this long is, hearing from a young person that they were inspired or influenced or agreed, to some degree with a direction that you've been on or that you're taking. What else do you get, right? Like you can work to the end of your life hard, and there's a lot of costs, that come with that, working, traveling, all of those sorts of things. One thing I have learned, and I do try to communicate, is that don't get caught in the end result. I mean, it is important that it comes out perfectly, but sometimes it's not something you can control. So you must love what you're doing while you're doing it. I got that message once a long time ago. I saw this movie called it was called The Mystery of Picasso, and it was a pretty cool film, very simple. He was just like, in a dark room. He's like got just shorts on, that's it, bare feet, no shirt, and he's painting on a some kind of screen, so that there's a camera and you can see what he's painting on one side, and there's a camera that sees him from the side, and that's it. So across an hour, he would paint, right? And you're there just stunned. You're like watching Picasso paint. But what he's also doing, he's just talking about his life, all the things that sort of inspire and drive him. And the painting transforms 3 times, so you think it's this, then it's that, then it's this. He gets to the end of the painting, and he's like, this painting is now dead to me. And he was really serious about it. It's dead now, right? Because it was only about what he feels, or sort of in the act of his expression, and yes, perhaps more visceral, and real time, if you will. But I took away the message that if you don't absolutely love what you're doing while you're doing it, you could get, set up for, some letdown, by the industry of movie making. You know, sometimes it's a work of art and you're proud, sometimes it's not. You invest years towards those types of end results. I have a hard time at this point, like, spending years towards an end result and not necessarily being happy at the end of it. And I'm also at this point a little bit, I find it very wasteful that you spend all of this time creating a universe that is seen in these pictures, and the whole thing can be discarded once it's done. You know, like, yes, it's sort of memorialized, right? It's baked, but the world is kind of like just stuck there. And I think it would be more satisfying if the universe that so many people spend so much time putting together could live on. So my thing at this point is to try to figure out a form of media that we can all work in, that, you know, going back to the young person, right? You started with this question. If they were able to work in a media form and with tools, you know, that allowed their creation to continue. So real-time everything, real-time media at highest fidelity, cinematic fidelity, but in a sense it's actually made in a way that would allow us to sort of step into it later, or in parallel, or, you know, actually push it out in other form factors like immersive. Right, so if I'm a young person, I would think carefully about I hate the word tools because it sounds so sterile, but I would think really carefully about what you master and who your mentor under, such that you are prepared for, you know, sort of a product of your work that can live on further than one-off creations. And the cinema business has to get hip to that because it's very wasteful. And I think their pipelines grind people into the dust sometimes. People are very proud of their creations, but they pay a heavy price for it.
Some of what you were just talking about, especially with real time, has been a conversation. ILM Lab has been using Unreal Engine 4 as an example across virtual reality, across filmmaking, and that's also a video game engine. What are your thoughts about the role real time is playing in the types of experiments you guys and creations you guys are doing?
Well, I mean, I was a co-founder of ILM Lab, but I'm at Magic Leap now.
Okay.
Right? So we founded X Lab to, you know, pursue exactly what I was just talking about. That was the sort of the mission to be able to do cinematic fidelity real time is one of the goals, but also to explore new form, right? So if we're going to make a world, a universe, and we were lucky when I was there at Lucasfilm, we were lucky to have Star Wars as a universe to draw from. One thing that I would mention that's probably less known is that ILM Lab was supported greatly by the writing group for Lucasfilm, the story group. So it's like the most advanced graphics division in all of Lucasfilm and ILM, you know, advanced in terms of new, you know, real time. But in fact, actually tethered directly to the story group, which is very interesting. So our experiments, not all of them, some of them were quite technical, but some of the experiments really were about, you know, the nature of experience, the nature of universe, what it's like to be inside of an immersive destination. You could, you know, there's a lot of ways you can sort of approach where is your center point when you're thinking about what the experience could be, and often, and it had a lot to do with being connected to story. The destination actually in terms of virtual reality, the destination was the best center point, because the destination, if we chose something from the Star Wars universe. It has a history, it has a future, it has, the trajectories of characters cutting across it through the history of the lore of that particular destination. It gives you this incredible foresight about what to put into the into the container that you ask people to stand inside. And then the nature of the experiments are like, okay, well, in what situation do you want to place the participant? Not the user, which is a very sterile word that has come out of the tech sector, but the participant, right? Or the visitor, right? The visitor of the destination. So XLab did and has, is still doing various experiments that have to do with that. And not just virtual reality, other things as well. But at this point, for me, I want to be working inside of mediums that have social foundations to them, like the ability of people to be experiencing things together in both, not both, but in all these immersive mediums. It's hard sometimes to understand structured story. It's almost it's not worth the sort of anxiety that people trying to figure out what that is, because like reality, I think it's more a place to sort of derive, to have experiences from which you could potentially take out and forge story from. So, for example, let's say I'm a writer and I've written a book, some fictitious universe or storyline, characters, all this, right? But I'm a real person. I'm a writer, but I'm a real person. I'm having a real life. I have a real family, real childhood, real relationships. I've witnessed things through my whole life. I'm paying attention to things happening in the world, right? That is all source material that's gone in here and has somehow translated through metaphor, right, into now a storyline, right, and a new world, right? But really, a lot of that is metaphoric and is representative of things, that I'm actually borrowing from reality. And I think that VR and mixed reality experiences, we're talking about the creative side now, but I think VR and MR experiences could be, again, the source, right? You step into simulation, you're brought into very fascinating situations. You do what you choose to do, and if you're with other people now, it's the sort of relationship of you with they as you're in these situations, right? There's two ways you can look at story. Story could be the byproduct of your total experience in that simulation, right? That is now the story, how you engaged in what was presented to you. That part is a story. Another story could be that which you take out and process and then turn into something else if you are a creator. So I think it's about world building and creating really fascinating simulations for humans to step into and to take from, and not get too hung up about how to cope with the fact that we've jettisoned editorial and cinematography as two primary languages of storytellers that are fundamental at a core level. They're like intuitive languages that you don't even need to teach a child, right? So you can take a child and you can put a child in front of an animated film or a movie, what have you, and you don't have to explain editing at all, right? They can see cuts and disruptions in time and changes of angles. You don't have to say anything to them, and they can walk away and be able to intuit all of that, all of the message and the story and everything that's going on with no education ahead. So that makes it a very, very powerful language. Cinematography and editing, those two things, a really powerful language, and we can't discount the absence of those things in immersive, right? So immersive is not necessarily, we haven't figured out the language, right? What is the grammar and the language that works? And all where I'm at the moment is that it's going to take so long that it'll be a long time before we understand fully what the one thing that I do know is that you can lead people into simulations of all sorts, and they'll have the experience they have, and that in and of itself is a story of that experience. So I'm that far with it.
The video game industry has been telling social stories now for decades. How has that foundation helped when jumping into the mixed reality realm?
I mean, that's foundational, right? We stand on top of that. But the difference, of course, I mean, is still quite different, because inside the video game, that's a world of your creation. This is the real world, and the real world is unpredictable, right? In games, there's not all games, of course, right? There's some emergent gameplay, which is amazing and fascinating and very relevant. And there's like remarkable new experimentation with characters that can learn. They have behaviors that are learned, and forms of awareness that we haven't seen before just recently. But now if you're in the real world, so this is the dynamism of the real world, right? It's like you can't predict what will happen in space. I mean, I guess you can control it. If you have a theme park, you can control it. But once you walk out onto the streets, who knows what will happen? So a new mechanism has to be put in place in order to understand what's happening out there. So, we walk out on a street corner. Now I'm going to just to get a little bit towards mixed reality, a future of spatial computing. I walk out onto the street corner in a city, and on that street corner could be like, aligned in geospace right there, layers and layers. Like could be 1,000 layers of possible. Call them applications, but it's a dry word. It could be a whole universe, right? I decide to unlock, the city application, or I unlock the transportation, or the health, or the education, or entertainment times 1,000 possible experiences. Could be games, could be artistic expressions, right? On and on and on. These layers could be sitting there, right, aligned in space, and waiting for you to, choose to unlock them and let them, envelop you, right? They're in situ, around you in that corner. But you're there with other people. There's things going on. There's cars. There's traffic. You're with other people. You've done all sorts of things through your entire history leading up to that point, right? All of those things are factored, or will be factored, in spatial computing. Spatial computing means it's the understanding of what's happening in situ right then, and it's the awareness of what's happened before, whether it's what you've done before or the collection of people. And so now the application, I'm just saying down the line, the application will factor these things, a really interesting one, will factor these things, and it'll shapeshift and react accordingly. There really will be, computing happening. This can happen not just on a street corner. This can happen in a university, right? This can happen in the place where you work. It can happen in your hospital. So mixed reality is going to be prolific through all of those sectors, and there's two things going on. The platform itself needs to accommodate this adaptation to what's happening at the moment and who's there, and the context, really, right? It's all about the context. And think about it, eventually we'll have layers and layers, and they'll be across whole cities and cities around the world, and cities will connect to one another across all sectors. Eventually you will have something like a version of the internet, but it won't look and feel like the internet exactly. It'll be volumetric, it'll be different, it'll be all media types. You wait till 5G really becomes something, and suddenly you have really high fidelity starting to appear. You're starting to get to a place where people can, like hollow portal around the world, so you have co-presence. You suddenly have changed the nature of communities because people can be in different places at once. VR is not really going to offer. VR, we can do these things technically, but it's isolating. If we're talking about real life, so I want my friends and family who I've kind of not seen because they've all moved around now, we can be present together, or we work in the same company and we can be volumetrically present together. It's absolutely going to happen. We want to have a place for our back to the universe, right? So if we want to have our universe living persistently in real world space, not all universes translate, again, right? Going back to, I made a fantasy universe, it really has to stay contained in that. So I'm either only going to do that online or VR, what have you, but I do think as mixed reality / spatial computing comes online, people will be thinking about more universes that can couple with the real world or make sense logic-wise with the real world. So as it becomes possible to sort of house and serve persistent adaptive content in situ in the real world, there's a whole evolution of that. There's a lot coming.
It's very exciting. The VR industry is still very early, but recently Oculus said that the number one usage of VR is video games, right? VR video games. What role do you see gaming, even as it evolves, playing in mixed reality, at least at the early stage?
Yeah, it'll be fundamental. It'll be one of the pillars, no doubt. The thing, though, that I would point out, though, is that it's experiential gaming, and it's a little different. That's something I know. I mean, we can take mechanics of interaction. We can take like what we've learned about interaction, but if you think about it, you're now, in the case of VR and mixed reality, you have to now start to accommodate the human interface aspect, right? We know if you're posturing or in proximity to things, if you're gesturing, if you're looking at things, you're going to be able to vocalize and express yourself towards things. Human interface, which is not really permeated gaming quite yet, is all that everybody is going to have to think about for the next, the transformation of gaming. If you want to do immersive gaming, you don't have to do it. But another thing, though, that will happen is that people will want some of their games to spill out into the real world. They'll want multi-platform, and they will have to think really carefully about how people are, experiencing the actual content itself, because those people are having a different kind of a feeling than you're going to have inside the safe game world behind the screen. Right? When you're inside, you absolutely have heightened emotional reactions, and again, part of the new paintbrushes, the toolkit is going to involve deep learning, and so you will, even as a game designer, will start having to think about patterns of behavior of the users themselves. So learning from how people actually engage, right? So we do definitely need to move past old paradigms where it's just a rule, like I did this and this is what I get back. It has to be, I did this 10 times, therefore I'm exhibiting a pattern of the way that I want to engage, and now things should be customized to that, to me. That I think is going to keep us busy for a while, thinking about.
We're already seeing at the infancy of eye tracking in VR, in traditional PC. What role will that play in that human interaction interface?
Yeah. So now I would like you to, XR would be good for you to utilize now, because there's going to be VR is very important, but the same sort of underlying construct that we make for VR can be propagated into other Rs, MRs, right, and other Rs. People need to start thinking about XR in the way that they put things together, because down the line, if you want an audience of millions, you need to think about this thing that I spent a lot of time and effort and money to make could translate, because it is real-time media, over into augmented reality via mobile, mixed reality via glasses, who knows, other forms of immersive. So I think it's really important that people think that way. But back to your question, firstly, knowing where someone is looking is it's kind of a sacrosanct piece of data from a privacy point of view. And systems have to be put in place to ensure people are not ever, exploited or abused. Their data is very valuable. It's personal, but there are other methods, like blockchain, for example, that can, take the ownership or management of that data out of the control of companies. And it's different if you are a company and you're using immersive for work, that's a different matter, right? It's your intellectual property, and if it's helping in the performance, in training, in the pipeline that you've created in which you're using VR or mixed reality to help the flow, you know what I mean, of a particular thing you're making or what have you, that's one matter, okay, so that's a company. But in the public space, it's imperative that people have, things like what they're looking at, I can't say the word, can you say it?
Anonymically?
Anonym. It's the word that I can never say. Anonymous. Yes, we have to be anonymous, right? So there's different things that could be done in tech, to make that somewhat plausible. And then there are other kinds of trust-based systems like blockchain that can ensure that we know where your data is and that you control it, and that you decide if you want to release it. Now, there's other ways that you might want to. You can release your data, right? Because if you do release that kind of data in the right form of anonymous, you can have a much more powerful experience, obviously. Characters and things in the world sort of understanding what you're interested in, right? Makes that world really dynamic and compelling and really aware of you, and that's going to be very powerful for people. So once we have privacy worked out correctly, people will want to utilize that kind of data, because imagine characters that are in your world and they really are aware of you and they care. They can have a sense of what you're feeling. You may like that, you may not want that, right? You should be able to opt out, but if you want to opt in, there's got to be ways you can do that, and never fear for the future having released that kind of data. But eye tracking is going to be super powerful.
Yeah. The last thing I want to ask you, we've seen esports rise in the video game space, first with traditional PC and console. Now virtual reality is starting to get involved with esports. What do you feel mixed reality potentially could open up to that confluence of sport and video games?
There's a lot. I feel that, there's different layers of it. If you mean esports as in, many watch some, there's various things we can think through. Esports as it exists today, and the games that are already sort of ruling, we can't break the sort of method of play, that is succeeding, and so it will take some time to figure out how to translate certain types of esports play to the real world, and they need to be customized around the real world. and abide by the context of the space that things are playing out in. So like if someone devises a game that takes place in Central Park, New York, you know, and it becomes the most, you know, amazing thing we've ever seen, okay, that's one matter. But it's not going to be so simple to translate League of Legends as it is, right? At the speed that it's played and the way that you play it, easily to mixed reality. But that said, absolutely having a God's eye ability to see things, you know what I mean, and to be volumetrically in places, right, where remarkable play is occurring, that could be astounding, like absolutely astounding. Again, mixed reality, VR will be great for that, but I think mixed reality is going to be much more accessible for people in groups to do that, because esports is a community type audience. You want to be with people doing that. I think that crazy cool shit you could do would be like, you know, being able to analyze, just like regular sports, do analysis of what has happened and what had happened. That is like, you know, fantastic for fans, right, to understand how something took place, because some things happen at lightning speed, some things are just hilarious, some things are just social moments that are like unlike any other, right? There's so many moments, and being able to put yourself in situ inside the moment in all these interesting ways, and to do that in a co-presence way around from anywhere around the world, I think there's a lot of applications in both mixed reality and VR. Commentators, I think commentators could step into their analysis. You know, that would be really cool. A lot of that stuff, you know, you don't have to necessarily experience it in mixed reality form. I mean, it's just as interesting to see it in traditional media. So twitch out gameplay that was captured volumetrically, but you see it in traditional media. That's really interesting. I think that, you know, people just by their nature like to live voyeuristically, or for example, reality TV. Why is that still with us, right? It's some of it's really bad, but some of it's super addicting, right? Just the life of others, right? Esports is like that. It's sort of, you're living vicariously, right? And so watching the Twitch screen is very exciting, actually. You don't have to necessarily be there. And I think that virtual reality, you know, if you like VR chat, you look at social VR, it's starting to really like, you know, take off, right? Where, okay, I don't have a VR headset, but I can actually be there by a PC. I can sort of see what's happening on a Twitch stream, right? The audience suddenly can go from a small little niche group of super users that wind up becoming the actual subjects, right? The players, the sort of participants, they wind up becoming the, you know, the subjects, and that is exciting for the right type of person, and they'll do anything to get to that. But then you start going out a couple of layers, and you could have audiences of millions, as esports has demonstrated, right? Audiences of millions. So VR and mixed reality should take some lessons from esports, right? How you propagate to audiences of millions, but you can close down to the point where you're like really close to being inside the game. I think mixed reality is going to give the super fan that ability.